Sometimes in photography, things are not always the exact way we want them to be. So we're going to dive into Lightroom Classic and we're going to spice up a little bit of a boring photo, a little bit of a flat photo. We're going to use loads of masks, loads of different masks as well. Oh, that's exciting. But I'll tell you what else is exciting. It's Tutorial Tuesday. Welcome back to Tutorial Tuesday, where each and every Tuesday we bring you a brand new, fresh photography tutorial. We're going to dive in. We're going to look at this photo this week. Now, as you can see, it's not awful, but it's a little bit boring. It's a little bit flat. The light is, not doing anything particularly interesting. So we're going to spice this up a bit. We're primarily going to use a lot of masks to do that because we can shape where the viewer's eye is kind of going. We can shape the light a little bit. There's a lot that we can do to make this a lot more interesting as a photo, especially because, this time of year we get a lot of nice sun, we get a lot of nice springtime kind of beauty, but we also get a lot of this. So let's dive in. The first thing we're going to do is actually begin with some global edits, right? So actually applying basic edits to the entire photo. And what we might do is just bring down the highlights a little bit, not too much, little bit of contrast, a little bit of clarity. I'm going to up the vibrance a touch as well. And I might just warm the overall photo to something like that. Nothing too crazy, maybe a little bit more. We can always come back and change that later if we want to. Now, that's pretty much all I'm going to do to begin with. We are going to dive straight in with masks because I can just see a million different things that I think we should address. The first is this foreground element is way too bright when I think this farmhouse is going to be the main sort of subject of the photo. So we're going to bring in a linear gradient, bring this up from the bottom, something like that, and actually just bring that exposure down. It's going to help draw the viewer's eye upwards a little bit, darken this area, but also just apply a little bit of depth because you can see, especially this first bit is getting reasonably dark. And actually we could go in and do another linear gradient, something like this, and just darken that initial bit even more. So we create a little bit of depth to the image. The next thing we're going to do is play around a little bit with the sky. And what I'm going to do here is actually come down and use a color range mask. This allows us to pick a color somewhere within the sky. We're going to pick the kind of blue up here. And then we can use this refine slider to actually refine how much of the sky this is actually going to be selecting. What I want to do is get the blue areas, just bring that down a little bit, maybe bring the blacks down a little bit. I'm actually going to just click again on the blue. There we go. That's what we want. And just darken that. What I want to do is create a little bit of drama within the sky. I want to darken the actual blue of the sky. There we go. That looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and do another one, another color range mask. This time I'm going to select the cloud and I'm actually going to boost that a little bit, the exposure, and bring the whites up just to really play around with the contrast within the sky. Okay, I think that's looking pretty good. The next thing I'm going to do is actually go ahead and do a full sky mask. So I'm just going to select sky there. And I'm going to come down. I want to bring the clarity up quite a bit. And I'm just going to boost the dehaze a touch. And you know what? Let's bring that exposure up a touch there as well. And then one more, let's do a color range. One more color range. Let's go ahead and select this kind of darker area down here. Something like this. And actually what we're going to do is subtract from that mask. We're going to use a linear gradient to subtract this upper part of the sky, something like that, so that we are only really getting this bottom part here. Let's also subtract from that a radial gradient, which I'm going to do across the middle of the image, like so that we're really just getting the bottom part of the clouds. And then we'll bring the exposure down there. That's nice. That's really darkening that area. Okay, nice. Okay, this is quite exciting, actually. Let's go ahead and do a new mask. We're going to go ahead and do a radial gradient this time. I'm going to bring that across the image, across where this farmhouse is, and just brighten that. I want to make sure that this is a brighter area of the image. So something like that. And we're going to go ahead and do another linear gradient. This time, we're going to actually aim to do some things with this grass area here. So we're going to do something like that. But what we're going to do is then subtract another linear gradient so that actually we're able to just control where this goes. We're going to go something like that. We're going to feather it a little bit less. Remember, with the subtract one, we can actually remove the mask. So we end up with this nice feathered linear gradient, but just really on that grass. And what I'm going to do is just darken that a touch, as if that's a nice bit of shadow there. Okay, I'm really liking that. Right, next, we're going to bring in a linear gradient, and we're going to bring this in from the left, something like this. This is going to be our kind of main light source. We're going to amplify the feeling of sunlight. So we're going to bring the exposure up a little bit. We're going to bring the dehaze down a touch, something like that. Nice. I think that's actually looking pretty good. And then what we might want to do is actually come back to the overall edits and actually just bring down the overall exposure a touch, because the image is getting a little bit bright now. And I'm going to come down to the tone curve where I'm going to pop 1 point in the shadows, which I'm going to bring down a little bit, something like that. And then another point a little bit further up, something like that. Now that might be a bit strong, but that's adding quite a lot of contrast. Now we've done a lot there, and we've done it all quite quickly. I'll be honest with you, we've moved through that very fast. Let's look at a before and after of what we've done to this photo. So we can do that by pressing the / key on our keyboard. We're going to press that. That's where we started. Pretty flat image. You know, nothing particularly exciting going on there. Let's press it again. This is where we've got to. So what we've really done here, again, before and after, primarily is dodging and burning, right? So really accentuating light and dark in different parts of the image. And it just becomes a much more interesting image to look at. We have a much more, there's a lot more going on. There's a lot more visual interest. And also, I would say before, flat, this is kind of bright down at the bottom. The sky is very boring. And then after, it does feel more like the farmhouse is the subject of the photo. And we can actually accentuate that a little bit further. So what I'm going to do is actually come down and do another radial gradient, reasonably large, over the farmhouse like that. I'm just going to brighten that a little bit. What we don't want to do is make it super obvious, but we just want to naturally and very subtly draw the viewer's attention towards it. Let's do another one, a big one, something like this. And I'm going to invert this, and then I'm going to bring the exposure down. That's going to add a little bit of a vignette to the photograph. And again, let's look at before and after. Before, after. We've not really done anything with colors when it comes to this photo. We've almost exclusively worked with the exposure of it, which is quite fun. Now, if we were going to play around with colors, we could actually come down here to something like the hue, saturation, and luminance sliders. Maybe we want to bring the orange down a little bit towards the sort of burnt orange, a richer orange for this foreground element. Maybe we want to bring the blue over to aqua a little bit. And green, I might just bring over towards the yellow just a touch, not too much, but something like that. The yellow I might bring over a little bit as well. Again, that's affecting this foreground element quite a lot. And then saturation, we can come down here to something like the blue. Now, if we were to suck that out of the image, it's visually interesting, but I think I like there being blue in the sky. In fact, I might even want to boost the blue a little bit. I might want to take a little bit of this orange out, maybe even a little bit of the yellow, not too much, not too much. And then the luminance, we can actually get the same sort of effect with this sky by bringing the blues down a little bit. Something like that. I think that actually looks pretty good. Let's come back up here to the white balance. There's quite a lot of magenta in this photo, and I think I'm going to bring the slider down, not too much, but just towards the green a little bit. I actually really like that. So let's look at the before and after again. This is where we started, and this is where we've got to. Quite a significant difference, I'm sure you would agree. We could, if we wanted to, go in and actually create one more mask with a brush and really start to kind of brush in. We're using a lower flow here, 55. Some of these sort of darker areas. And what we could do with that is actually, let's just actually minimize this masking panel. What we could do with that, just pop some on over here, something like that, is then bring the exposure down a little bit, just to add even a little bit more depth to the photo. Some of these darker areas we're just accentuating again, so that we've got this bright area on our farmhouse. Again, let's look at before and after. This is where we started. This is where we got to. And if we look at all the masks we're using here, It's a lot. There's a lot of masks doing a lot of work, but like I say, primarily dodging and burning, which is super interesting. And that is how I would look to spice up an image like this, where it is very flat. There's still a lot you can do with the overall feel of the image by just playing around with that light, which I think is a really, not just a good technique to learn how to do, but I always find stuff like this really speaks to me and tells me kind of what do I find interesting in a photo? What am I looking for? And I've learned a lot about what I like to photograph by using these techniques. It means that I'm now looking out for light, an interesting light, just as much as I'm looking out for an obvious kind of subject within a landscape like this farmhouse. I think actually interesting and good light can by itself create or even be the subject of a photo. And I've only learned that for myself from doing these kinds of edits, where I realize how important it is to the photograph. Now, I'd love to know, would you have done something different to this photo? Would you have stopped a little early? I do tend to go a little far sometimes with these tutorial edits, because you get into it, you know? You get excited. And sometimes actually the best way to counter that is to step away 15, 20 minutes, come back with fresh eyes, and then you can go, okay, I might have slightly overcooked it. Maybe I just need to dial some of this back. Or maybe you think, actually, no, do you know what? If anything, let's go a little bit harder with this. So that's super interesting. But I'd love to know what your thoughts are, whether you'd go a little bit further. And are there any other masks that you would have used? Or are these masks that you wouldn't necessarily have used in the past? I'd love to know how you feel about all of that. Let us know down in the comments, because that's always super interesting. Of course, there's a new tutorial every single Tuesday, and you guys have had some great suggestions for future tutorials. So keep them coming if there's something specific that you would like to see. I will do my absolute best to get around to doing those ASAP. Otherwise, of course, don't forget to like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next video. Until then, as always, thanks for watching.